My wife Elizabeth has been an incredible partner. She's tall and slim with a striking blend of brown and blonde hair and a figure that turns heads when we first met. The sparkle in her eyes reminded me of a kid seeing gifts under the tree on Christmas morning. My name's Toddy. I'm 6 feet 2 inches and thanks to my years on a swim team, I've got the classic swimmer's build. Our friends would always tease us, saying our constant smiles gave away our feelings. Our love life was electric. Meeting up was almost. It was always about that connection. Things took a turn when Elizabeth made a mistake involving Glenn. He was a guy who stood about 6 feet 10 inches and played basketball. My phone started buzzing with messages and photos from a party she'd attended. It seemed like she'd shared a kiss with him and then disappeared into his room the next morning. I confronted her, and she came clean. She admitted she'd gotten drunk and done something stupid. She insisted it meant nothing and that her heart still belonged to me. Most of our friends argued it was a one-time thing. After 2 weeks of anger, I decided to let it go but made it clear she wouldn't get another chance. Interestingly, the friends who pushed for forgiveness often ended up in rocky relationships, while those who told me to walk away are now happily married. I started a career as a programmer and Elizabeth took a job. As an administrator, we got married and had 2 kids, Frederick and Monica. Life was pretty good until Elizabeth got into real estate, which meant longer hours and less family time. Given her history, I decided to install monitoring software on her phone and slip a small recorder into her back. I soon discovered she was seeing a man named Joe. I was heartbroken. I noticed their chats seemed to lack any deep affection, so I tried to fix things. I cooked her favorite meals, dressed up the kids, and showed her as much love as I could. She responded positively, giving me a sliver of hope. One Friday night, she told Joe she couldn't meet up with him. I was thrilled and feeling optimistic, so I asked my brother and his wife to watch the kids. To look after the kids, I took Elizabeth out for dinner and dancing that night. We even tried to set a personal record for how many times we could have sex, and although we didn't quite hit it, we sure enjoyed the attempt. The next day, we picked up the kids and spent the day at a water park. I thought things were finally back on track, but then. On Wednesday, I saw a message from Elizabeth to Joe. It said, "Can't wait to see you. I miss you." I was really hurt by it. I realized I couldn't trust her. Everything she told me felt like a lie. I decided I wouldn't listen to any more of her excuses. Elizabeth had betrayed me and our kids by using the camera feature on. I saw Joe's face on her phone through the monitoring software. He was just another colleague I remembered from our office. I realized I'd have to approach this without confrontation. Instead, I planned to take her out of our lives, make her face the consequences, and secure primary custody of our children. Around that time, Monica's school group had a concert. I moved the reminder on Elizabeth's phone calendar to the day after the event. Sure enough, she spent the night at Joe's place. Afterwards, I left her a message, pretending she just missed it. Monica was disappointed, but I gently explained that sometimes adults get you up in work. Elizabeth's late arrivals became more frequent, and she'd come home smelling freshly showered. She even showered while still in her work clothes. She tried to make it up to Monica, who eventually forgave her but made her promise not to miss the next concert. I couldn't tell if Elizabeth was genuinely remorseful or just trying to avoid getting caught. I noticed she and her lover often met at a small place famous for its Scotch eggs. One day I casually mentioned it to my father. "I'll get back to you on that." I made a reservation for that Wednesday, their usual day, after confirming she was at the office. I headed there with her parents. We arrived just a few minutes after Elizabeth and her lover. I spotted them talking in a booth at the back. I asked, "Do you want to sit in a booth or at a table?" Elizabeth's head shot up and she quickly moved away from him. He looked bewildered until he saw us, then tried to shrink down when we approached. Elizabeth came over and said, "Mom, Dad, what are you doing here? We heard you were having Scotch eggs here, so we had to try them," her dad said with a warm smile. He seemed happy to see her. Elizabeth introduced her lover as a colleague and pointed to the booth her mom and dad were in. Her mom and dad's expressions soured. We wouldn't want to interrupt your lunch meeting, her mom said, staring at him with narrowed eyes. Elizabeth insisted, saying they were just grabbing a quick bite before the lunch was awkward. After her lover reluctantly shook hands with everyone, Elizabeth tried to fill the silence with small talk. Her mom frowned at her food, and her dad couldn't take his eyes off the guy, barely speaking. I made small talk, asking him questions like how long he'd been with the company, or why a nice guy like him was still single. At one point I suggested, maybe you could introduce your sister to him? Things went well, and we might even be family. Elizabeth's smile was tight. Her lover finally said thanks, but I already have a girlfriend. I asked with a grin. Is she someone we know or a secret? She's in a rough situation, trying to get out of a bad relationship. I don't feel comfortable saying who, he replied, trying to keep his composure, but his face fell as he noticed the looks from everyone around the table, especially Elizabeth, when our food arrived. Laws barely touched theirs, eating quickly. I only managed a few bites of my Scotch egg. Elizabeth noticed and asked, Is the Scotch egg any good? I've lost my appetite. I stared at her, and her mother motioned to the waiter, who handed her a $100 bill to cover everyone's meal. Then she excused herself to the restroom. The waiter returned with the change and Elizabeth's father pocketed it, giving Joe the eye. Gave my colleague a look that could cut glass before heading to the restroom. I told Elizabeth and Joe I was sorry to interrupt their business lunch. I said I was sure they had plenty to talk about and plenty of people to deceive. I got up to leave, and Elizabeth chased me out to the car. She said it was nice to see me at lunch. She said we'd discuss this at home. Her parents were going to be there soon. Elizabeth was practically rushing toward the restaurant entrance, clearly avoiding Joe's gaze. When she looked down, she muttered, It's probably for the best. Her parents caught up to us and gave her a quick hug before getting into my car. We drove home in silence. When I dropped her parents off, her mom hugged me tightly and told me she loved me like the son she never had. Her dad gave me a hug too and asked me to bring the kids over more often because he missed us. I was really struck by the realization that Elizabeth would lie so easily to the people who'd always supported her. They'd already distanced themselves from Eleonora, her younger sister, because of her own infidelity. Whenever Elizabeth brought her up, they'd shut her down immediately. Eleonora had even once tried to sneak into her in-laws during a Sunday service at Law's church. Elizabeth's dad interrupted the pastor mid-sermon. He apologized to the congregation before walking out, ignoring Eleonora entirely. That evening, Elizabeth came home with a story about how a dinner with Joe had helped secure a big deal for both of them. I told her it was inappropriate to be out to dinner. I don't want you to be alone with him again, and I don't want you to go out with him. I'm sorry if it bothers you, she replied. I won't go to lunch with him anymore. Don't worry, he's out of the picture. We just landed a great deal from that night on. I told her I'd be sleeping in the guest room until she gave me and her parents a proper apology. Remember what happened when your sister got caught cheating? I said. She looked alarmed. You're blowing this way out of proportion, she protested. A small part of me was relieved, though, that I had a valid reason to avoid intimacy with her. Meanwhile, I took more steps to stay ahead. I also took the initiative to disable the transmission sensors in her car and hide a switch in it. This made it more challenging for mechanics to diagnose the issue. One day, while I was at Frederick's football game, Elizabeth decided to see Joe. I remotely disabled her car, and when Joe came to the car window, he asked what happened. He said, You came back so soon. My car won't start. The batteries. The headlights are fine, but the engine just won't turn over. I need a lift home. He said. No, you idiot. If my husband sees you dropping me off, it'll be a huge issue. Call a tow truck. I need to pick up Monica for her band competition. Can't your husband drive her? He's with Frederick and his game. To a rental car place, and I'll call a tow truck to meet us there. Joe dropped her off and she managed to rent a car. Unfortunately, she was late picking up Monica, who ended up calling me. I got a friend to bring Frederick home, then picked up Monica just in time for her event. When we returned, Frederick was already in his room. Elizabeth was waiting in the living room, still in her work clothes but smelling freshly showered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't pick you up," she said. "My car broke down, and by the time I rented another, your dad had already come to get you." "It's fine, Mom. I made it just in time, thanks to Dad. I hope it all works out." After Monica left the room, I spoke to Elizabeth. "I called your work after lunch. They said you'd left. You had over 2 hours to pick up Monica." "What happened?" She said she'd been running some errands and thought she had enough time. She didn't expect the car to break down. "You never mention any errands, just things that need handling," she replied evasively. "I hope those things are worth more than your daughter's respect." "You're walking on thin ice," I said, heading to the guest room. It was clear. Elizabeth decided to go with Joe, even though we had a family disagreement about the impact on her kids. The mechanics couldn't find any issues with her car, which meant my modifications had worked perfectly. Meanwhile, Monica was pushing her buttons, asking if I could take her and her friends to the mall on Saturday. She said she didn't want to be stranded if her car broke down again. Frederick overheard and laughed. He thought it was a good one. Later, Elizabeth told me I needed to talk to the kids about respecting her. I'll give you the chance to apologize when you're ready," I said from the guest room. She called my response stubborn on Saturday. I took Monica and her friends to the mall myself. Elizabeth said she had work, but her car was parked at a house listed for sale. She must have been meeting Joe when we returned. Monica thanked me loudly in front of her mother, showing who she appreciated most. Elizabeth called a friend and completely ignored Monica's questions. Elizabeth looked like she wanted to complain, but I started laughing and took my drink and headed into my office. She was wearing her work clothes, but she smelled freshly showered. I couldn't shake the feeling she'd had some fun in one of the houses she was selling. Hopefully she at least changed the sheets. With Frederick's birthday coming up, we rented 6 lanes at a bowling alley to celebrate with friends and family. It took some effort to find a spot without a Wednesday night league, but I made it happen. When I shared the plans with Elizabeth, she looked uneasy, so I told her I'd take the kids and their friends while she picked up the cake and candles. We'd have pizza, open presents, and a week ago, I messed with Joe's car 3 times to stop their meetings. They rescheduled for Tuesday, so I messed with his car again once it was fixed. Then on Wednesday, I saw Elizabeth's text, "Looking forward to seeing you later this afternoon." Her GPS showed her heading to Joe's apartment, so she'd have enough time to enjoy herself, grab the cake and still make it to the party. I rented a car with a large trunk for a little plan I'd cooked up after confirming Elizabeth was at Joe's apartment. I placed a covered cage by the front door using a door ram. I broke open the door, turned on a taser against the metal cage and released an angry skunk inside. As I hurried away, I listened through Elizabeth's phone. The screams were incredible. Joe was yelling at her to call the police. I blocked her phone so he had to make the call himself. He said a wild animal had invaded his apartment. When the police arrived with guns drawn, the skunk went on the attack, making them scream and gag. They managed to shut the door, but it took hours for animal control to capture the skunk. Afterwards, 2 officers questioned Elizabeth. Joe and 2 more officers arrived but left quickly because of the stench. One officer asked, "Who's the owner here?" "I am," Joe replied. "Who are you?" "I'm just visiting," Elizabeth replied, handing over her ID. The officer looked at her with skepticism. "How do you 2 know each other?" "We work together," Elizabeth answered. "What were you doing here?" the officer pressed, picking up some documents. After confirming their identities, the officer asked, "Why was there a skunk in the apartment?" "It was a birthday present," Joe started to explain. But Elizabeth cut in. "Did you buy an adult skunk for your boyfriend?" the officer asked, eyebrows raised. "HK, not my boyfriend," Elizabeth shot back. "Stop lying. Why did you buy an adult skunk as a gift?" "I didn't. I meant to get a younger one. He told me he loved skunks, so I thought it would be a nice surprise, but it turned out to be an adult. It attacked him. The skunk must have been expensive." Not too much, she replied, attempting to brush it off. So do you buy pricey pets for all your coworkers? Are you a worker or just your boyfriend? The officer asked again. I'm not going to answer that, Elizabeth replied. I know this story is nonsense, but I can't take the smell anymore. You and your friend are free to go. I'm not contaminating my car with that stench, the officer said, slamming the door on his way out. What was that all about? Joe asked, looking confused. We couldn't exactly tell them someone broke down your door and… Elizabeth began, but Joe was already looking at her in a way that made her feel like she was going to be in trouble. Why not set a skunk loose? Then they'd ask my husband if he had anything to do with it, and he'd either know for sure or they'd tell him I was here. Joe, how many other women are you seeing? No one. When was the last time you slept with someone else besides me? About a month ago. So you've been with her this whole time? Yes, there was another one. Months ago, he admitted that they were married. She asked why he would assume that. He replied, Because I know what kind of thrill you're after. Elizabeth said, Answer me. Yes, he muttered. Both were married. He didn't know. Elizabeth sighed. Great. Now I know. Lying to the police was the right choice. This is likely payback from one of those husbands. I'll find out if my husband was behind this, she said just then. Her phone rang. Hey, Elizabeth. Did you pick? I asked her if she'd picked up the cake yet. She said she was still at work but was leaving now. I told her not to let Frederick down. She assured me she was on her way. Elizabeth showered, dressed, and left Joe's place. I remotely disabled her car halfway to the store. After several attempts, she got it to start, but it broke down 3 more times before she finally made it to the bakery. She arrived late to the bowling alley, and as she walked in with the cake, everyone covered their noses. Coughing at the overpowering skunk smell, Frederick simply asked her to go home after the party. On the way home, he turned to me and asked, Dad, why does Mom always miss our events? She tries to do what's best for the family, but sometimes it's tough to be in 2 places at once. I replied, But you're always there, and you make more money. Fred pointed out. Well, my job is more flexible, so it's easier for me to be around my favorite skunks. I joked. Not funny, Dad. Monica chimed in. I joked, it'll be funny when you tell your friends at school tomorrow. We had to toss out the skunks and end the cake, which the kids thought was hilarious. I was more than happy to return to the guest room that night. A few days later, I caught Elizabeth sniffing the upholstery in my car, looking like a mouse hunting for cheese. I followed her upstairs and even recorded her sniffing my shoes. I never asked her why her own seat didn't reek of skunk. I was on my way to the hardware store when I realized nobody wanted to join me, so I went to Joe's apartment instead. His car was there, so I knocked on the door. He answered, looking puzzled. Can I help you? He asked. I think we can help each other, I replied. I'm Elizabeth's husband. Mind if I come in? I asked, pushing my way past him into the kitchen. The smell of fresh paint mixed with a lingering skunk stench hit me as soon as I walked in. I could see that they'd bought all new furniture. Look, I said, I know you've been with my wife for over 6. After 6 months, I said, Hey man, we're just friends. Joe stammered. Would it help if I showed you pictures and videos of your meetings? Okay, so $2,000 for a video showing her face and body during the act. I'll also need written consent from you stating that you took the video and allow me to use it. If you already have evidence, why do you need a video? He asked, sounding skeptical. I need leverage for the divorce. I replied. That's really cold. He said. Cold like how she betrays me and our kids. I shot back, after a long pause. Yeah, just like that. He muttered. Okay, so make it $3. He finally said. 000, we're all set. Don't tell Elizabeth. I'll get her a spa and hotel stay. I called Joe on Monday to get the video and pay him in cash. He said it was fine. I asked, make sure her face is visible in the footage. I'll send the consent form today and call you on Monday. Then I left. On Wednesday evening, I told Elizabeth that I have a conference this Saturday. No issues with that, it sounds like a relaxing weekend. Have fun! On Monday night, I called Joe and picked him up. I didn't want to be recorded, so I took him to a quiet rest stop, checked him for any devices, and then led him back into the car. I asked if he had what I needed. He replied yes, handing me a flash drive. On Tuesday, he told me that another video would be the easiest money I ever made. I sat down with my brother and his wife and showed them a short video, some photos, and a list of Elizabeth's states, highlighting missed family events. I did the same for Elizabeth's parents and mine, asking them all to ignore her until I gave the green light. While Elizabeth was out with Joe, I sat the kids down to explain that their mom is infatuated with someone else. I told them I wasn't sure if she still loved me. They asked if we were getting a divorce. I told them we'd discuss it with her right now. She's at her boyfriend's house. They both gasped. She's there now. I showed them the GPS tracker on her car outside Joe's apartment. Is that why Mum misses our events? Monica asked. I showed them a dated list of her absences at family events along with the time. I also showed them a lapse tracker of her locations during Monica's concert and Frederick's birthday. They could see the timestamps of when she left the office and then Joe's apartment. Monica muttered. I reassured them that the most important thing is that I love you both. This is between your mother and me. After half an hour of crying, hugging and talking, Elizabeth walked in and saw our faces. She looked nervous. What happened, guys? Go to your rooms. Mom and I need to talk, I said. They hugged me, shot her a hurt look and went to their rooms. When the doors closed, I asked Elizabeth to sit down. What's going on? Elizabeth, I know you're having an affair. Oh God, no. That's not true. I'd never cheat on you. Why would you say that? She tried to sound sincere, even tearing up. If you won't be honest, this conversation is over. I was firm in my tone, saying that this must be a mistake and that someone had thought they saw something that wasn't true. She said, trying to convince me, that she was fine and that we were done here. She added that I should think about what I was doing to this family, and that we'd talk tomorrow. I told her that she should stay away from me and the kids until then. I then went to the guest room, and Elizabeth followed me. I told her she was wrong and that I would never do that. I closed the door in her face and heard her soft voice outside Monica's room. She was pleading with Monica. What did Dad tell you? It's all a mistake. Please open the door so we can talk. Monica texted me. Can you make her go away? I replied. I'll try, but she's denying everything. There's no point. You might be mistaken. Monica texted, I have pictures of them together. I replied, oh, was all? Monica opened the door. I found Elizabeth there, her eyes full of desperation. Leave the kids alone until we sort this out. You're only making it harder on them. I said, but I need to know what. You told them, and Elizabeth insisted. I told them the truth, that you're seeing someone else. This is between us now. Don't involve them. I said. Elizabeth went to her bedroom, and I heard her crying all night. The next day, I waited for her at the kitchen table. When she came in, I asked, have you thought about what you're doing? What are you doing to this family? She nodded, looking remorseful. Are you ready to be honest about the affair? She nodded again. It's all a misunderstanding. I had an emotional connection. We had lunch a few times, but that's it. I only love you. I'll be staying with my parents tonight, and the kids will be staying with yours. Think about what this is doing to us. I said, heading to the guest room on Saturday morning. I had breakfast with the kids at her parents' house when I returned. Elizabeth was waiting at the kitchen table. Are you ready to talk honestly? I asked. She nodded. Did you tell I asked, have you told your parents and your brother and his wife? Yes, she replied, her voice trembling. Why did you do this to me? You lied to me, to the kids, to everyone. Now you're claiming it was just a few kisses and you think our parents and kids turned against you because of me. Elizabeth's face fell, but she said, You've blown this out of proportion. If you're not willing to be truthful, then we're done here. The kids will stay with their grandparents, and I'll live in the guest room and work from home. We'll talk on Tuesday after work. Think about what you're doing to this family. I said. I'm leaving. And left the after dinner with my parents and the kids. I went back to the house to find Elizabeth sitting in the living room. We'll talk on Tuesday, I said, heading to bed. Elizabeth's friends texted me, urging me to forgive her and saying it was just a minor mistake. I made a video call and showed them evidence of the affair. They apologized. I think she was pretty embarrassed, and I doubt she ever heard from them again. On Tuesday evening, Elizabeth came home visibly tired. She brought pasta from our favorite Italian restaurant and set a plate in front of me. All those days, you're wondering what lies to tell your friends and family to cover up the truth. It takes a toll, doesn't it? I asked, and nobody would talk to me. They all think I'm a monster, she replied. I lied. I showed everyone the monster within me. Elizabeth, you showed everyone the monster within you. I did. I showed them photos and videos of me with Joe. I didn't let extra copies get out because I don't want our family ridiculed. She replied. Can I see them? I said. Yes. If it helps, I showed her the photos and videos. I love you so much. Can't we put this behind us? If you love me that much, why did you need someone else? I never loved him. Marriage is supposed to be about shared responsibilities, trust, and joy. I was always responsible. I trusted you and found joy in our life together, but you dumped most of the financial and family responsibilities on me while you partied. You looked down on me, you were quiet, you stole my love by giving yours away. I said. How long have you known? She whispered, 7 months. I replied. Why didn't you say anything? She asked. I hoped it was a one-time thing. I made a mistake. I waited for you to be honest, especially since you kept saying you love me. I replied. I'm sorry. How can I trust you now? I asked because I love you and I'm telling the truth. Is this the same truth you told me during our last 3 talks, when you denied everything? I asked. She fell silent for a few minutes. I finally asked, what can you do to make things right? I placed an envelope on the table in front of her. This is a postnuptial agreement. Sign it, and I'll consider taking you back. We'll need to go to therapy together, and with the kids to make this work. I don't want to sign a postnuptial agreement. If you want to end the marriage, that's fine, but I'm not interested in a financial advantage at the expense of saving our marriage. What do I get if I sign it? If we file for divorce, I get 70% of everything. If I'm the one who cheats, it's 50-50. If you cheat, I get 85%. In all cases, I get full custody. Have a lawyer look at it, sign it, and I'll consider moving forward. How much time do I have? She asked. Until Saturday morning, I replied, standing up. Are you going to eat? I got your favorite food. She said, after all you've done and all your lies, should I expect fresh arsenic in the sauce? Wife, I said, this seems personal. Please leave or I'll call security. She replied. It's about my wife and a coworker she's been intimate with. I explained. Do you have any evidence? She asked. Yes, I have photos and voice recordings of them admitting they were together instead of showing properties. I said. I'll play short clips on my phone. Her face soured. Can I assume my wife will be terminated immediately? I asked. Yes, along with her companion, she replied. You can't fire him, I said. I had permission to record my wife. Wife, not him. This can't be used in court, and I'd rather avoid any claims of slander. I doubt you want that either. Thanks for the info, she said, visibly relieved. Can I leave a photo? I asked. No, I don't want this going around the office, she replied. Elizabeth came home that evening in tears saying she'd been fired without a reference. She wanted to talk, but I just said Saturday and went to my room on Saturday morning. She was at the kitchen table. You should have quit as soon as this started to avoid any contact. Joe clearly has a problem with this. I said we should have discussed this. Sorry, but we don't discuss decisions that harm marriages or families. Have you signed the postnuptial agreement? I asked. She said, handing me the signed document that she had. I checked it, sent an electronic copy to my lawyer, and locked the physical copy in a safe. Then I laid out the new house rules. If you behave, we'll start counseling. I'll let the family know we're attempting to fix things. To be honest, I had no plans to start counseling. Elizabeth became the model's wife, but I noticed she'd installed a hidden camera in my office. I watched her set up on my laptop from my car the following Saturday. I joined her in the kitchen where she sat looking smug over her coffee. "Where are the kids?" I asked. "They're with my parents," she replied. "Why hasn't there been any intimacy recently?" I said. "It's actually been 8 months," she replied. "That can't be right," I said. "Maybe you lost track during your escapades," she said. Elizabeth said. "Well, we could change that." She gave me a flirtatious smile. "Elizabeth, I can't erase what you did or the images burned into my mind. It's not going to happen. I did everything you asked, and you still treat me like an outcast. I deserve more respect." I asked, "How do you want to approach it?" "Yes, I even deleted all the evidence, the copies on the cloud, and destroyed the flash drive." "You," she said, heading toward the door. Her sister, Eleonora, stepped out of the dining room, and they left together. Over the next 2 months, Elizabeth worked on convincing her parents and our kids that I'd made everything up. She said the photos were doctored and that I had no real evidence. She even dared me to show proof. But by then she'd deleted everything, and the kids were confused. Even so, her parents were eager to believe her. Thankfully, my own parents had doubts. My brother and his wife stood by me, but I felt isolated. I met with Joe to arrange for another video. This time I went all out, a beachside hotel room in Florida, 2 first-class tickets, and $5,000. I paid $000 for the video. I made sure the recording happened on the balcony. Joe asked for more money to cover a pricey restaurant, so I bought an additional first-class ticket for Eleonora, who was eager to tag along. 2 weeks later, I reviewed the new footage in my car, confirming everything was as I'd specified. I encrypted the video and uploaded it. I uploaded it to the cloud and saved a copy on an encrypted flash drive as we drove back. I had a few questions for Joe. "Did you approach my wife first?" I asked. "Not really, it just happened," he replied. "Who brought up the idea of being together first?" I continued. "She did," he said. I then asked how many other married women he'd been involved with. I switched off the recorder in my pocket. I wanted to see what he had to say. I accelerated to 70 miles per hour. "Hey man, what are you doing?" he shouted. We were injured but alive. I called the police, who took my laptop and flash drive as evidence. After a hospital examination, I went home, where I was bedridden for a week. Elizabeth heard about the accident and about Joe's passing. She called to ask about it, but I didn't tell her anything. The next day, the police came to question me. I told them about the connection between the deceased and my wife. I said that I'd paid him to stay away from her, but he kept demanding more, which led to the accident. "So, are you suggesting I deliberately crashed the car to get rid of him?" I asked the officers, who left soon after. I was sure I had both the motive and opportunity, but who would risk there? I don't think I'd risk my life by driving into a tree to eliminate someone. A few days later, Elizabeth called to propose that we discuss our marriage on neutral ground with her sister present. "I don't want this conversation recorded. Let's meet at a hotel." She suggested the house is off limits, but I'll choose the room. I replied, skeptical of her intentions. She said it wasn't safe, but I told her I wanted to avoid any recordings. We decided to meet on Saturday, so I went to the hotel. I followed Elizabeth and Eleonora to the front desk. The receptionist offered room 216, but I asked for a room with a better view of the front. Both women looked disappointed because they'd probably have to pay extra. I asked Eleonora to get the recording equipment from room 216 in the elevator. She was flirting openly, pressing close to my side. I reminded her that this discussion was between me and Elizabeth. Normally, Eleonora kept her distance from me, but today she seemed different. The room was standard, with a desk, a chair, a chest of drawers, and a queen-size bed. I looked around the room. It was a standard room with a bed, desk, and chest of drawers. There was no sign of Elizabeth. "What now?" she asked. "Take off your clothes," I said. "Undress completely." "I don't trust you, and you don't trust me," she replied. I looked at Eleonora. She seemed surprised that I was in the room with Elizabeth. "Come on," I said. "I don't want her seeing me like that." "Don't you have anything on?" she asked. "Half the town hasn't seen you." "Come on," I said dryly. "I don't have anything on." I looked at Eleonora. She had a piercing look in her eyes. "Get completely undressed," I said. She did as I asked. I knew she was playing along with my plan. I came prepared as Elizabeth and Eleonora started undressing. I quickly stripped as well, folding my clothes on the desk and placing a pen behind them. It looked like the hotel's standard issue, but it was weighted and had a hidden camera inside. I'd collected free pens from every local hotel, hollowing one out to fit the camera. After putting my clothes in the bathroom, I returned to the room, fully aware of Elizabeth and Eleonora's watchful gaze. "Right, let's get started. Elizabeth, I need to have a serious conversation with you. In a few minutes you'll know what this is really about." "I love you," she replied, her tone sweet and sincere. "I know," I replied, keeping my tone even and professional. "But I need to talk to you about some things." "Sure," she replied, her sarcasm evident. "But as long as the credit card works." "As long as the credit card works," I shot back, my tone firm and determined. Back, Elizabeth's voice. "Rose, don't be so bitter. Our marriage is strong enough to survive this. You drained every ounce of strength from us, repeatedly stabbing me in the back, and now you want me to turn around and just forgive you again?" I replied, my voice filled with hurt. "Don't be so dramatic. It was just a mistake," Elizabeth said defensively. "A mistake that's going to end in divorce." I replied, "Darling, don't be like that. It was just a little." She said it was just a slip-up, but it was a calculated betrayal. I replied in a mocking tone. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know it would hurt you, honey. I'm sorry I lied. I was ashamed. I stopped lying as soon as you confronted me." "Did you mean when you first denied it, when you called it an emotional connection, or the third time when you said it was just a kiss?" I challenged myself. "You only stopped lying when you saw the photos, but that doesn't mean you won't lie about other things. That doesn't mean you won't lie about other things, right, Eleonora?" Picking up on the tension, she interjected. "Maybe we should all avoid saying things we'll regret." "Are you serious?" I retorted. "How many husbands and boyfriends have you deceived? How many married men have you seduced?" Elizabeth quietly said. "I'm so sorry for what I did. Feeling guilty isn't enough," I responded coldly. "My job is to make sure you feel that guilt properly," I said, trying to downplay it. "What's the difference between you and a con artist? You gained my trust just to deceive me." I replied, "I didn't deceive you. Marriage is a contract of fidelity and trust, and you broke it." She argued I kept my end. "It was you who betrayed me." I shot back, "You forced me to sign that postnuptial agreement. It wasn't fair. If I spend too much money, I go to jail. Cheaters should face consequences. Marriage is about family and loyalty. Otherwise, what's the point?" I explained that Elizabeth was silent and unable to respond. "Do you know how many marriages that start with infidelity last more than a few years? Just 5%. Was it your plan to leave me and marry your lover?" "Well, we'll never know since Joe's gone," I said. Striking a nerve, Elizabeth's face twisted in anger. "I deleted all your called evidence. You can't control me anymore. Our parents and the kids don't know what to believe. Was it worth it?" She sneered. "I didn't destroy this marriage. You did. I'm just calling the end of it." I replied. Elizabeth shot back, maybe I wouldn't have slept with someone else if you'd paid more attention to me. Why should I when you barely acknowledged me? I responded. We sat in silence for a few moments, both of us trying to calm down. Did you eliminate him? Elizabeth suddenly asked. I smiled slightly, looking at the camera hidden in the pen. It was an accident, I replied. How could you do that? She tried to provoke a reaction, but I stayed silent. Her eyes filled with tears. He was a good man, she whispered, allowing some anger into my voice. I said, Oh, you mean the kind of man who seduces other people's wives? Elizabeth started crying. But you still love me, don't you? I corrected her. I loved you. True love is a privilege that most people never experience this, even in marriage. You had that from me, and all I got in return was your desire for money and fidelity. You threw away real love for cheap thrills. Plenty of people might want you for a fling, but no one will love you like I did, not after what you did to me with the kids. I was pretty firm with Elizabeth. She started crying and then pulled herself together and changed her approach. I need a drink. Anyone else? She asked. I'll go to the bar and be back so we can talk like adults. Elizabeth got dressed and left the room as soon as the door closed. Eleanor looked at me and said, You look good enough to eat. Now is not the time, I warned. Eleanor moved closer, standing between my legs. What she doesn't know won't hurt her, I said. I was trying to back her off when she suddenly pulled me onto the bed, screaming, Please stop. Elizabeth burst in, phone in hand. What are you doing? She said. My sister said. Eleanor cried out, He attacked me. Make him stop. Elizabeth pushed me back, smiling as she dropped the phone, probably sending the video to the cloud. You're in trouble now, she said. I have a video of you attacking her. The two of them laughed as I sat back in my chair, feigning defeat. Elizabeth wagged her finger and continued, This is how the divorce will work. That postnuptial agreement is irrelevant. Mention it, and I'll send you to jail. You'll get 10% of everything. I'll get 90% plus full custody and lifetime support. If you don't agree, the video will make sure you're locked up. I replied, realizing I'd underestimated her. Eleanor spoke up, Come on, Elizabeth. Elizabeth had been crying minutes earlier, saying she'd lost love. Now she was leaving with her sister, laughing at me. I watched them leave from the window, then got dressed. I got my pen and left the hotel. The meeting went better than I'd expected. The next day, Elizabeth was served with divorce papers that enforced the terms of the postnuptial agreement. When she threatened to use her recording against me, I replied, You didn't delete everything. If you try to, you'll regret it. Pin this on me. I'll be out the next day and you'll be in jail. Elizabeth was smart enough to wait. We both hired lawyers and I demanded that the postnuptial agreement be honored. I presented transcripts of all my recordings, explaining to her lawyer that we were in the process of restoring deleted files. I had transcripts for now, but no files. After a lot of back and forth, we set a court date. The main question was whether the postnuptial agreement was valid. I had concrete evidence a few days before the trial. I mailed forged letters to Elizabeth and Eleanor from the CBC. I told them that Joe had been diagnosed with AIDS and advised them to get tested immediately. I also told them to avoid intimacy for 12 months until they could be sure they were clear. This was on the day of the trial. The judge wasn't pleased with either of us. Elizabeth said the postnuptial agreement had she said she hadn't committed adultery, and that she'd been signed under duress. She cried convincingly, and I argued that the agreement was necessary because she was unfaithful and had violated our marriage vows, which made her an unfit mother. The judge then asked what evidence I had of her infidelity. My lawyer submitted the video and voice recordings, which matched the transcripts we presented. The judge turned to me and asked why I was producing these recordings now. We'd obtained the recordings after a long data recovery process. Elizabeth had deleted the originals, and certified data recovery is time-consuming. We just got the restored files. My lawyer explained, and the judge asked me directly, Did Elizabeth try to delete the recordings? Yes, Your Honor. We even have a recording of her admitting to it. The judge asked Elizabeth's lawyer if the transcripts matched the recordings. He confirmed that they did. The judge then asked Elizabeth's lawyer if he wanted to challenge the authenticity of the recording. Elizabeth glanced at her lawyer and shook her head slightly. Her lawyer responded that this answered the question of validity and nullified claims of compulsion. However, he noted, none of this alone proves infidelity. This was after Elizabeth had signed the contract. The judge noted that my lawyer interjected. He said, "Yes, Your Honor. Here is the transcript of the final video, along with the video itself, proves that Elizabeth was unfaithful after the agreement was signed." The judge looked at my lawyer and asked why this evidence was being presented now. This evidence was in police custody as part of an accidental death investigation, and we weren't sure if it still existed. My lawyer clarified, turning to Elizabeth's lawyer and asking if they had seen the video. The judge replied that they had, but they believed it was inadmissible because there was no consent form. There's no proof it wasn't recorded before the agreement. Elizabeth's lawyer said my client paid for plane tickets for Elizabeth, Eleonora, and her lover, along with the hotel room they used. My lawyer stated the judge turned to me and asked if I consented to my wife's affair. I said no, I never agreed or condoned her activities. I replied that I didn't know why my wife's lover was paid for their tickets and hotel. The judge asked how much he needed to stop seeing my wife. He said $2,000 tickets to Jamaica and a 3-night stay at a 5-star hotel. We agreed on the star hotel, and I bought ticket vouchers. However, he used the airfare and hotel vouchers for a stay in Florida the following week while my wife was supposedly at a conference. I explained, "How do we know this is the right hotel?" The judge asked. "In the first photo, you can see the hotel sign in the background. How did you acquire it?" The judge continued, "I paid for it when I discovered my wife's affairs. I asked him for proof and he provided visual evidence." I replied, "Why were you collecting this evidence?" The judge asked, "Why were you collecting this information?" I said, "Did he know why you were collecting this information?" The judge asked again, "Yes, several months ago." I explained, it was easier and more. It was more cost-effective to gather evidence from him directly rather than hiring a private investigator. I paid him $500 for an additional video. I clarified that Elizabeth had violated the postnuptial agreement. If you need someone to testify about the video's authenticity and date, her sister Eleonora is right there," I said, pointing at Eleonora. Everyone turned to look at her. The judge told me off for using inappropriate language. I said sorry straight away. Then the judge asked if that was all I got from my wife that night. I said yes, but her lover provided most of the records you have here today. He'd been documenting everything for months, including hotel bills and flights. I paid him around $3,000. Elizabeth's face flushed with anger, as she realized her lover had been selling these encounters to me for the divorce for just $3,000. She would have paid 10 times that to keep it hidden. I could see her calculating, as though she thought this was all I had. She assumed that if I had more, I would have shown it already. Elizabeth made a quick decision, whispering to her lawyer. When we returned, the lawyer requested a break. The judge granted it, and when we returned, Elizabeth's lawyer claimed they had a video showing me committing a crime of infidelity, which violated the posting. Both Elizabeth and Eleonora were prepared to vouch for its authenticity. We were ready to vouch for its authenticity. My sister and I didn't want to put the father of my children in jail, but now I see how manipulative he truly is. The video showed the hotel door, someone screaming, "Please stop," and Elizabeth bursting in, recording me on top of Eleonora. Elizabeth's voice on the video screamed, "What are you doing to my sister?" while Eleonora cried, "He attacked me." Elizabeth then grabbed her sister, dropped the phone, and the video ended. What happened? The judge then asked me what I had done. I told him I'd locked myself in the bathroom, and told my husband that if he didn't leave in 2 minutes I'd call the police. I also told him I'd uploaded the video to the cloud. Elizabeth replied, "Yes, I see. The judge then looked at me with a suspicious look and asked, "What do you say in your defense?" My lawyer responded, "We have a video to refute this claim." Elizabeth's lawyer tried to object, arguing that the judge said the video wasn't relevant, but he let it in. Elizabeth's lawyer sat down, looking pretty defeated, and Elizabeth looked pale. The video started with a discussion about the need to avoid recording devices and ended with Elizabeth and Eleonora leaving the room, laughing. The judge looked at me with a kind of understanding, like he could relate to my situation. Elizabeth whispered to her lawyer, who shook his head in resignation. My lawyer confirmed that none of my statements in the video were self-incriminating. It was all going wrong for Elizabeth. She'd wanted to convince me to forgive her, but it backfired when she tried to set me up with evidence about her lover's death. She'd also tried to frame Eleonora for an attack, but that didn't work either. Eleonora tried to leave the courtroom, but the video showed her pulling me onto the bed and forcing me to sit back down. Elizabeth was clearly ashamed. Her parents and some of her relatives left the courtroom before the video ended. Elizabeth knew she'd lost. The judge ruled in favor of enforcing the postnup. My lawyer then revealed that Elizabeth had a secret bank account with more funds than all our shared assets combined. She'd been depositing extra paychecks and bonuses there for years and had even taken out a second mortgage on her house. I'd asked my lawyer not to mention the secret account, but he presented my own bank account statement to the judge. This showed that Elizabeth had transferred our mortgage funds to her secret account. This led to the discovery of her hidden assets. I was the one who transferred the mortgage using her login credentials. I found her secret account when I installed monitoring software. There are specific laws about undisclosed funds during divorce proceedings. The judge awarded me 100% of our shared assets and required Elizabeth to pay all attorney fees and court costs. She transferred all our property to her secret account, so I didn't owe her any share of the house's value. The judge also sentenced both Elizabeth and Eleonora to 90 days in jail for perjury. I got full custody of the kids, the house, 2 of our 3 best cars, and several years of alimony. Elizabeth was left with only 5% of the property, which didn't even cover her legal fees. She kept her clothes, car, and jewelry, but I'd already sold her expensive pieces after learning of her affair. I hadn't noticed since I'd stopped taking her out. I used the money from her jewelry and the accident insurance to buy my dream car. Elizabeth struggled to stay involved with the kids and had to commute an hour to work. They never forgave her and felt embarrassed to be seen with her. Both she and Eleanor ended up. I also worked as a bar waitress and sent Joe's parting words to the husbands of 6 women he'd been involved with. I shared Elizabeth's drunken messages with them sometimes. She blames me for ruining her life and wishes I were dead. Other times, she sobs, begs for forgiveness, and pleads with me too. I've saved every message in the video in case she tries to get involved with our kids. Elizabeth never truly loved me. She was always more interested in taking than giving. I now have a restraining order against her and Eleonora because they might still be holding a grudge against me.